Fog machine. It should be there. You just hit the button, James.
Can somebody tell me where our hosts are?
Yeah.
What?
I felt scared that you could hear me chewing.
I heard like a hum.
White on set.
Alright, let's get this done.
Roll camera. Roll sound.
Action.
Welcome to All the Hats, a podcast about filmmaking and industry.
Welcome to All the Hats Pod, a podcast about filmmaking and industry. I'm James Gary.
And I'm Eric with a K.
Nice. We did a good job. So we were just like discussing what we should talk about, and we were thinking like more of an opinion-based type thing. So we were talking about language, like, you know, the use of like, you know, language that might not be okay for kids, or I don't know.
Yeah, pretty much just language in any sense of the term, really, in regards to film.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the things that we were talking about before this episode here is whether or not to allow cursing or too much cursing in dialogue. Yeah. Because some of these shows and movies that we see, they're just over the top with their swearing. You know, the F-bomb is every couple of words and things like that. It's like, is that really realistic and necessary? Yeah. And you know, I was telling you that my views on this have changed drastically over the last few years, probably over the last 5 years or so. And originally, I really wasn't like interested in any swearing in movies and like I would watch them, but like writing, I would never write any swear words or anything like that in my scripts. But then I realized that really just isn't realistic, you know? Anyone, I don't care who you are, like if you could tell me you don't swear, but you get upset enough or you hurt yourself or something like that, you're probably going to swear. Even if it's not usually a swear word. I had a friend who'd always say frick a lot, or friggin', and like, and he'd hold himself, he'd be like, frick, and you know, like, oh no, but you might as well just said it, because we all know what you're saying there.
Yeah, it's in your head. I feel like, I mean, there is a difference in something being in your head and actually saying it.
There is.
But I don't know. I guess as a kid I didn't swear at all personally. Like I grew up not swearing, joined the military. I didn't swear in the military, like maybe a few times, but like I didn't even swear then. But I got out and I was like, I mean, I didn't want to be in the military. I didn't want to be, you know, somebody who just followed the crowd. And I felt like it was a very easy thing to do in the military, is just follow everybody else and do what everybody else does. So after I got out of the military, I just decided that it was okay a little. Like in the right settings and for the right reason, it's okay to write dialogue, you know, that says things that, I mean, that people really say, you know, but there is an over the top. In my opinion, there is a point where it's just too much. But back to it. So we were talking about well, one of the things, one of the movies that was like praised for all its cussing was The Wolf on Wall Street. You know, like they were saying that they had like so many F-bombs or whatever, and it's like more than any other movie ever or something like that. And I just don't get that, because what you want is your character. You want these words that they're saying to represent the people. And maybe that is that environment. Maybe that's correct that they would cuss that much, but it just sounded to me like it was like an award for having people cuss a lot.
Right.
And it felt like it was just silly to me.
Yeah. I mean, again, I guess it depends on what you're trying to show. And I agree. I think if you have a character or two who swear all the time, but then you have a couple characters who maybe swear every once in a while during a movie or, whatever it is, I think it helps to show where that character is coming from, maybe how they grew up, what kind of lifestyle they live, things like that. But when you have everybody swearing all the time and the swearing doesn't really drive a point forward at all, it's just, what's the point of having it? It's just there to be there, because the writer themselves like to curse all the time or something. So, in my personal opinion, if you're going to write dialogue that has curse words, even a lot of curse words, those words should really drive a point. They should lead you to whatever the exclamation is that the character is trying to make, the statement that they're trying to make. And I've started doing that a lot in my scripts over the last couple of years because, again, I wasn't writing anything with swear words. And then I realized, this whole piece of dialogue here would work a lot better if the F word was right here instead of whatever. I don't remember what words I was using, but it's like, it's not realistic,
Yeah.
to say, oh, freaking darn it, or whatever,
And you can have a character that talks like that, but that's that character. Like, that character says freak, that character says heck.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Those are the words that character uses, and that makes that character who they are. And I think that's good and realistic because there are people like that, and that character represents those people.
Yeah.
I feel like. And then there's people who don't cuss at all. Like, they specifically avoid all manner of cussing, not even freak or dang or anything. They just don't do it.
Yeah.
So we're kind of putting freak in the same boat as, the F word, and they are different, but I feel like you should be writing to your characters, not just to like make it edgy. I feel like it's silly.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
I don't know. So I've been working on a little script. It's not even a script form yet. It's just like written down in Evernote. But and like the first words are mom, dad, and then like a little bit later it's fuck, like what's going on? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because it's like just like the viewer is confused, so is the character, and I wanna show like an extreme level of confusion. Like, he doesn't know what's going on,
Right.
And he's just talking to himself. So there's only so many things you're going to say out loud. Well, I mean, some people talk to themselves a lot, but for most people don't sit there and have a full on conversation with themselves. There'll be like a few words, and maybe you won't understand what they're trying to say, but like, it'll be like something small, something, maybe even half a conversation, because the other half is happening in their brain. So, I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Actually, one thing I want to bring up is, and this is something that I wrote with the duplex. We talked about it a little bit of several episodes back. And that is action lines that I had written as the character's mindset.
Yeah.
And I had mentioned a couple of episodes ago that there's this one moment at the end of the script where a woman is telling our main character something, and it's a surprise to him about something that she's done.
Yeah.
And immediately he just thinks like,
Yeah.
And that comes along with language as well, because we don't need to use dialogue to express language, but we can use body language to express some of those languages.
Yeah.
What would it look like when you say the F word, or when you say like F you, or you call somebody a bitch or something like that? What is the expression you might have without ever having to say it? And can you, show that and let the audience realize, oh, I know, or at least I have an idea of what he's thinking right now, or she's thinking right now. And I think that's a more fascinating way of bringing some of these swear words into the story without actually ever saying it. And it makes it much more complicated for the artist and the character, both the director, the writer, and the character, because you got to figure out, like, if I'm the director, how am I going to explain this to the actor? And as the actor, how am I going to take this understanding of the writing and transform it into a performance.
Mm-hmm.
And above all, they have to figure out how are we going to get the audience to realize it or see it. So it definitely would be much more difficult, but I think it'd be just much more fascinating too, because you're expressing language in a much different format than simply saying it. Because saying it is on the nose, and in some cases you have to be, But if the dialogue doesn't call for it, like for example, in this particular setting for the duplex, the character's not going to just break in the middle of this woman's dialogue and call her a bitch because of what she's saying. It's just, it's not going to work for the story, but he can think it and have a look on his face for it.
Yeah.
And so I think you got to figure out what the best medium is at that point to allow a character to express themselves.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a time and a place for things. Like, there's a time and a place for like cussing, and there's a time and place for not cussing. But I think holding off on things too, like let's say like a character doesn't cuss throughout the whole script, and you can see that like maybe this character, let's say in The Simpsons, what's the neighbor called? Geez, we're gonna get emails and letters. No, I'm just kidding. That's what everybody says. The next door neighbor, Flanders. He's like a Christian, like a strong Christian character, who like literally, he says dag nabbit and flibber flabber, like type words. But there was like one point I remember he's like, he goes off the deep end and he says the F word.
Mm-hmm.
And like that meant so much in that moment. And I know it's a cartoon, but it just showed what happened and what kind of change his character went through, even though it went back like the next episode.
No, well, sure. But but that kind of thing, like if you're going to have a character who doesn't swear at all, and then something evokes a type of emotion that causes them to swear all of a sudden, and it comes out of the blue and it's shocking to not only their surrounding characters, but also to the audience, then you realize this has a much deeper impact on this character. And how can that then develop the character from then? What kind of story arc is this character going to have from here forward to go back to the way they were beforehand, or can they go back? So like if you're going to do something like that, it's easier to do something like that than it is to have somebody swearing the entire time and then have them draw back and not swear at all, because then it's weird. It can be done, but I think then it comes off a little weird and maybe wouldn't pick up on it very much. Unless you put them in a situation where they're like swearing all the time, and then they have the situation where they would normally swear and they bite their tongue for a moment. Like,
like a gangster has to go to a church.
A gangster in a church.
No, I'm sure gangsters go to church all the time. I'm just saying, like in the streets, like he's cussing, like doing bad things.
Right.
I don't know what gangsters get down with. I'm not a gangster, so doing stuff, whatever that the gangsters do, and then he has to go to church and he has to live a different way, even though that may not be who his character is. Like he restrains himself within that and within those four walls. You know what I'm saying? And you can show that.
Well, and
also,
that actually goes along with those characters who feed off their environment, because there are people in this world who they'll change the way they talk or their personality based on the type of environment they're in. So if they're around a bunch of people who swear all the time, they'll swear all the time. If they're suddenly then the next day or a couple hours later with a bunch of people who don't swear, they won't swear. Yeah. If they're with people who drink all the time, but they never drink, they'll start drinking. Things like that. There are people who just simply follow. They don't lead. They don't have any sense of, I guess having their own sense of purpose or focus of, whatever. I
think we all follow to some extent, and then we all lead in some extent in certain areas of our life. But I think and language could be one of those things. There's a lot of people when they move from like the north to the south, they'll slowly pick up on like the language. Some people do it more than others. Like they'll slowly start sounding more southern in the south. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then when they go back up north, they're around like their family up north, and they just pick it right back up. they're suddenly northerner.
Yeah.
But their family probably thinks they sound a little more southern, even though they've
Which is
started
weird. Like, I
talking.
remember, like, when I was a kid, my sisters and I would pick up on some of the, when we were down in North Carolina every summer, we'd pick up on some of those little, you know,
Yeah.
little twang that they've got going and stuff. And nowadays that doesn't really work out so much, at least for me. I'm never going to say soda, minus just now, but I'm never going to say it. It'll always be pop.
I mean, it doesn't even matter to me.
Right.
You can say pop if you want.
Oh, dude, it was a year and a half ago. Oh gosh, I was sitting in class my last semester and I got in an argument, a text message argument about whether or not it's soda, pop, or Coke. Because there's
Well, it's not Coke.
No, I know. Well, yeah,
Unless
I know.
it's Coke.
But so a friend of mine sent me a map stating all the states that say this or say that or say that. It's just like I spent a whole 45 minutes of my class period sitting here texting, arguing as to why it's pop. and then two others arguing, no, it's why it's soda. Such a waste of time.
I mean, I don't think it matters, but I mean, I say soda. I don't say pop.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to argue with somebody over something stupid like that. I don't know. I feel like it's a waste of time. Language is language. But I think all those little things like cannot even show, like in a script, can even show where your character is from, you know? So if you choose to use the word pop for a certain character, you're probably saying that this character, especially if everybody else has said soda, or we know that all the other characters are saying soda, we know that character is not from here. You know what I'm saying? Or the other way around. You know? Or you have your characters get in an argument about soda or pop. Which
let's just make a whole movie about characters getting into arguments about soda and pop.
No, I don't think I would. I don't know if I would do that. But sometimes just those little discussions can make a character very interesting, though. You know, especially how they convey things.
Yeah.
So just having like little words that are from a certain area or can say a lot about a character and where they're from and who they are. So like if you're going to make a gangster, unless you specifically want him to be a different kind of gangster, you probably want him to cuss a little, at least a little. So, because that's what gangsters do. I mean, and more than gangsters cuss. But I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna like vocally, if you're gonna have someone speaking a certain way that relates to their character and who they are, and you don't want to waste any line in a script. Every line should be saying something about the character or their situation or where they plan on going. Something in the past, something in the future, something now. You know. You want to be always adding to a character or to the story that you're telling.
Yeah.
You don't want something that's just not going to take you anywhere.
If it's not moving you from scene to scene, then there's no point in having it. It's just a waste of space and ultimately a waste of money, which is why you should figure that all out in the script portion of production.
Definitely. How do you write dialogue?
What do you mean?
How do you go about like when you're writing a character's dialogue? What do you usually? You just kind of like let it flow out of you, or do you have like a certain way of doing it? Do you have a certain pattern, or?
It depends. I think usually it just kind of flows, but it'll take me a few pages before realizing what type of, I guess, accent or demeanor I want my characters to have. Because there are moments where I'll have characters write in complete slang. It's just slang after slang after slang, and it doesn't make sense to everybody. But it makes sense to the character, and when you see the story as a whole, it makes sense to the surrounding characters, and the audience. So for me, it usually starts off all relatively the same. It starts off with how I would typically talk, and then as I'm going through, I'll backtrack only a few pages. I won't write a whole thing and go back and change dialogue. Dialogue is going to be figured out within the first 2 to 3 pages. And once I got that figured out, it carries over. And so with moments like, for example, scenes that I write with kids, the kids are going to sound vastly different in their speech pattern than what adults are going to sound. And I know I go back to the duplex a lot, and that's only because that's what we're currently working on and what I'm writing. But our main characters start off in the beginning of the story as kids. And so the way they sound, the way they talk, the way they act as kids is vastly different from how they're going to act and react as adults. And that's something you and I have talked about too when going through some of the drafts here and just going through the revisions. You're like, well, you had mentioned to me, like, if this character does this here, shouldn't that also carry over to when they're an adult? And I had mentioned, well, that really depends on what type of influences the kid has had between this stage of his life and his adult stage. And since we don't see the teenager
we weren't talking
stage,
about language.
we weren't talking about language, but we were talking about, but it could be a sense of language. So we were talking about sports in this case, because the kid wanted to play baseball. He wanted to play catch with his father.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned, well, shouldn't he also like sports in the future as well as an adult? And I said, not necessarily, because it really depends on the factors playing through his teenage years and all that. So as an adult, he's not a fan of sports, and we don't ever talk about it, so we really don't know. But in my mind, he's not. Yeah. And there is this life-changing moment within the story that really shows like this might have been the factor that would have changed everything. You know, this trouble between him and his father. But like even like something that somebody likes, whether it's sports or music, that can all go along with a sense of language. Like, how would they react? You know, being someone who's an athlete or looks up to athletes, how would they represent themselves? Would they represent themselves like some of these athletes that they look up to? You know, and how do those athletes talk? And if they talk like that, would this person talk like that? Or would they react the same way this person reacts and act and this and that, you know?
Yeah.
So a lot of it, I think language is so much more than just what someone says or how someone someone's demeanor is, you know, body language and stuff like that. It goes beyond that. In the end, it's just, you know, if I have someone who says y'all a lot, you know, they're going to be most likely coming from a southern, not deep south, but they'll be somewhere southern from the normal Midwestern, northeast area of what I usually write my characters, because I'm from Ohio, and therefore a lot of my characters come from the north. Yeah. But in the end, it's just, you know, what kind of environment? You got to think, what kind of environment did they grow up in? Even if your characters start off as adults in the beginning, you have to think about like, okay, this is my character. They're 30 years old from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. Mm-hmm. But what were they like? What were they like as children? We'll never see them as children in the story, but I want to know what they're like in my mind so that I can figure out how they're going to be represented as adults. You know, what kind of factors have, you know, persuaded them or swayed them one way or another, you know, what type of difficulties, were there deaths in the family, were there misfortunes, were there great things that happened to them that give them a certain sense of pride, you know, what kind of stuff has led them to their 30-year-old self. Yeah. And again, that's not something that the audience needs to know, but it's something I think the writer needs to know in order to have a full grasp of their characters. That way, if a question comes up later in the story as to why they act like this, you have an answer yourself. And you can easily rewrite what you need to rewrite for that character. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you got like a way of talking for your character that just continues on, like, because you know what the source of the way they communicate, the way they talk. You know exactly what motivates those certain words that they use, or like y'all or cussing. Yeah. Whether they like start cussing up a storm or not, or if they just maybe say it here and there or whatever. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. For me, I am terrible at dialogue, and I don't know. I don't think I'm terrible, but I do think that I'm lacking a little, because I feel like when I write dialogue, I feel like it's good, and then other people read it and they think it's garbage. So I just assume it's garbage. So. I have ideas on story, and that's what I think I'm good at that, and I try to just stick to that now. Yeah, it's weird because I've seen a few writers who have written similarly, where like on a normal day their speech is really good. You know, they'll use words that I don't understand. You know, I have to go to a dictionary or something like that to figure them out, and they know what they're talking about. But trying to translate that to a script is vastly different. And I think it's not because they can't do it. I just don't think those people have yet grasped onto how to get into a character's mind that isn't them.
Yeah.
Like if you're writing a character that's exactly like you, I think it's a little more simple to an extent, because I think writing yourself can also be very difficult because you want to believe you're someone that you're not, and you need to dig deep and figure out like, who am I when I'm writing this? But for those people there, it's also very difficult to get into someone else's head. Like, how would they talk? How, I wouldn't say this, so why would they say this type of thing? And just doesn't always come off right.
Do you think that people read scripts like that? I wouldn't say this, so this person wouldn't say this?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
I've had people comment on my scripts telling me that like this word is wrong because I've said instead of saying what is it, like they are, I'll say there. It's abbreviated. Yeah. Like, oh no, this shouldn't be there. This should be they are. I'm like, no.
I mean, if not, I don't know who all's read Stephen King, but I mean, he misspells a lot of words in dialogue, a lot.
Well,
but no, I mean, he's not misspelling, but he's writing how it's being said.
Okay, yeah.
Like on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that you're misspelling either.
No,
I'm just saying that, like on purpose, he writes exactly how it's gonna. Like he, in the Dark Tower, he writes for Detta Holmes, and she's very Southern, and he writes it exactly how she's saying it, and it feels real to me when I read it, and I really like that. So, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean,
I wish I could do that. I feel like I'd mess up, and somebody wouldn't be able to read it correctly. So.
And I think you need to get past that kind of fear factor, because in the end, like if you do the research and you know how, in this case, a Southerner talks, or how, whatever, someone who has a speech impediment talks, and you're able to translate that onto a piece of paper, then yes, it'll be difficult to read, but in the terms of the story, the overall story, and through production, if we're talking about film, if we're talking about a book, it's different too. But Stephen King also has, in It in particular, has a character who has a speech impediment. He stutters a lot. And I've heard it's extremely annoying when you're reading the stutter over and over,
Yeah.
And it can be frustrating, but it's part of the character. You need to have it. It should be there. You don't want to like take a leeway.
You don't want to say they have a stutter and then not, when you're writing their dialogue, it's just regular dialogue. It's like,
the whole point of a script is to pull the reader into the story. And same with a book. The whole idea is to pull someone into it. Like I've heard people say, oh, there's too much description here. You don't need this much description. I disagree. And I think it depends. I think in a book, you need more description. You should have more description because you're developing an entire universe in your book.
You want to say what's in the room, everything that's in the room, because they're never going to see the room except for in their head.
Right. And I understand some people can imagine a room themselves. Like, okay, well, let me decide what's in this room by myself. But I think you can still put more description and let that reader figure it out, and even add more or take things away as they go. In a script, it's different. I don't think you need as much description for most things, because you're going to have artists who are there to look at the script and be like, okay, this is the character, this is where they're setting, this is, think of their emotions and how they deal with stuff, and what would their room look like?
Yeah.
Like the one thing I put in again for the duplex is our main character Ben. When he's a kid, he walks into his bedroom. It's a dark bedroom with a single bed in the center of the room, and he has Jurassic Park posters and airplane pictures on his walls.
You changed that?
I did change it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about that later. That's not.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
But and that's it. Like no one needs to know what color the walls are. No one needs to know what kind of light is coming through. No one needs to know if there's lamps or if there's this or that. That's all something that the art department can figure out later.
I think just enough to say character. Just enough to point out character through us going into the room. You know what I'm saying? Like there could be so much more. There could be dinosaurs everywhere. There could be like a plane hanging from the ceiling. There could be like all kinds of things in the room in reality, but we only need to show enough for the art to take it and run with it.
Right. Exactly.
Like these are the things they care about. We see 3 posters at least, and these are the things that are on them.
Right.
So now the art can like take that and run with it and go crazy with the kids' room, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's the big difference between someone authoring a book and someone authoring a script. And the thing with the script is that there's so many more people in play in the future of the story.
Yeah.
That all have to have their hand in the final product, or in the production of it.
Mhm.
And so that's their job to figure it out. It's not just the writer, they've got the main story. Without a script, you've got no story. But when it comes to all the visuals and then, the little cues and things like that surround these characters and our locations, there are other departments that are built for that particularly.
Yeah.
And they have the know-how to figure it out.
It's a very collaborative thing,
Yep.
filmmaking, which is like one of my favorite things about filmmaking is that it's collaborative, that it's a lot of people coming together with their expertise. Because like a writer, they only know so much. I feel like a movie can be so much better because of the fact everybody that knows a lot about their job come together and make something amazing.
Right.
But a writer, they can look stuff up,
Well,
they can figure things out.
I think a writer who comes from a filmmaker background can probably writes vastly different than just a regular writer because they know more, and it could be a problem too.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Like if you're a writer who's also going to be directing your own script, that's one thing. But if you're coming from a filmmaking background and you're trying to write for somebody else, you're going to start to notice that if you direct a lot, you're going to be putting little cues into how you would shoot this. And then when you pass it off, people are going to be like, what is this? Like this is not how I would do this, So that's something you got to be careful with. But yeah, the whole idea of the writer is to build the story, build the characters. And then from there, it's up to the actors and the director and everybody else to figure it out.
But back to the language thing, I feel, and character, I feel like characters are the most important thing. And that might just come from being in a film school background, because your story could kind of collapse or mess up like during filmmaking. But if you have beautiful characters like that people are interested in, people are going to still like your movie, even if it sucks story wise.
No, I agree. There's a movie called what was it called? I think it's I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in This House. And that whole thing is pretty much character driven because it's really just one or two characters for most of the movie. And that's it. It's like there's really not much of a story there's a story, but it's not as you would see with like multiple characters interacting with each other. You're following a couple of people around and they're often on their own.
Yeah.
So you need to be like so in depth with this character and see their emotions and how they're feeling and how they're reacting to things to really get a sense of, oh, this is a good movie,
Yeah, for sure. Because that's when you cry, is when you actually care for a character. If you don't care at all about the character, you're not going to cry.
No.
Well, I guess we're done. Thanks for joining us here on All the Hats. And, you can follow us on our Patreon or any of the other social medias. We'll give you links to that in the description or whatnot. Thank you. You have a wonderful day.
See ya.
Bye.
And cut.
Good.
Cut. All right. You make that work? Good. So we'll go ahead and retog it.
That was simple.
Yeah, so
Same thing.
second team in.
Feel free to email us at allthehatspod@gmail.com.
And if you would like to check out our schedule or any other information about us, we are on facebook.com/allthehats.
And of course, be sure to stream us wherever you stream podcasts.